Well, welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming tonight to this forum with a representative, Steve Pickett from the Government Accountability Board. I'm Shirley Senarighi, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters, and the League is sponsoring tonight's program. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the League before we begin with the Voter Accountability Board presentation. The League is a trusted, nonpartisan political organization. We don't endorse any particular candidate or party, but we are directly involved in shaping issues to help keep our community strong. The League encourages informed and active citizen participation in government, and voter service was originally and continues to be our #1 priority. We encourage qualified people to run for office. We hold candidate forums to help voters learn about their candidates, and we promote voter registration and voter turnout. The second thing that we do is to address issues. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we also influence public policy through education to the community and our members, and also advocacy. We study issues, then we form positions, and only then do we take action. We are just one of 900 plus local leagues across the country who just completed a national study on the role of the federal government in public education. And this spring we will be doing a second national study on the topic of privatization of government functions. So if you have an interest in those kind of activities, think about joining us. Watch the media for additional information about any of our activities. Any members of the public are always welcome to join us. The League is an organization of both men and women, and we always welcome new members. If you're interested in learning more about the League and how you might be involved, go ahead and take a membership brochure that's on the table. We also had a sign-up sheet where you could indicate if you'd like to receive membership updates. That's our newsletter that we send out. And we have a lot of people who are non-members who receive the League newsletter because they want to know about our events and activities. We send them out to nearly 100 people, plus the 48 current members to our organization. I want to remind you that we also have a website, and you can Google it. You can go to the League of Women Voters of Door County that way. And then we also have a Facebook page. You could search for us on Facebook, and that's another way of finding out about upcoming activities. If you have an interest in this particular topic, getting information out about the voter photo ID law and that kind of thing, we do have a small committee who's going to do some additional work after tonight, between now and the spring elections, and our next planning session is next Wednesday at 4:30 at the Door County Library in Sturgeon Bay. That's Wednesday, December 7th. It's because of people in our community, many of you here in this room, who provide donations to the League that really help us be able to sponsor educational activities. The two forums that we're hosting tonight and tomorrow are funded in part by the Joyce Foundation and the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin Educational Network. We want to thank them for supporting us, and for the many local donors who support all of the League's work. I want to acknowledge Laddie Chapman, who's recording tonight's event. You might have seen him in an article in the Pulse just this last week. It was a great little article about what's happening at the Sevastopol Town Hall. And anyway, tonight's program will be aired on local access channels and also posted on doorbell.net, as well as posted with a link on the League's website. I want to thank the Nassau Town Hall for being the facility available to us tonight, and then Scandia Village for hosting us tomorrow. Please know that there are a variety of handouts at the table, as well as information about the league on yet another table. Please help yourself to anything that looks interesting to you. Any of us with these kind of name tags are league members, and feel free to talk to us about the league and its activities after tonight's meeting. And with that, I welcome Steve Pickett, our presenter tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, the first question is, how many of you have a driver's license? So everybody's got one. Well, then you can go home, because that means you can all vote. The issue that we have with this, whether you're for photo ID or don't like photo ID, I really don't care, because the issue we want to talk about is, what do we do with the laws we have it now? How are people going to use this to vote, and what changes have occurred in the election since last year? And we've got several things. The handout that you have, each sheet can be used separate from everything else in the packet, because we're talking about changes, we're talking about different types of ID, we're talking about absentee voting. All of those are contained on separate sheets. So when you leave tonight, you can use this if you have conversations with people and they want some more information. You've got most of it right here. Now, the Government Accountability Board has been around for a couple of years. Before that, we were the Elections Board, the State Elections Board. And our purpose is to go out and talk about elections, whether it's training people about election day activities or clerks or talking to other people about it. One of the things with a photo ID is to get people the information about photo IDs. If you have a driver's license, you've got a photo ID. One of the things that you'll notice is that we have different sections made up here, and I just call your attention to page 5, which talks about the major impacts. On the bottom is our website, gab.wi.gov. On our website, there's a lot of material about elections, and if you have questions, you can always call us. There's an 800 number there for teletype, and there's also a help desk number. Call and ask. Tell them what you want your answers to, and we have election specialists. We have different people working with statewide voter registration. They can answer the questions that may be bothering you. And we'd rather have you call than think, well, you know, I don't want to bother somebody. That's what we're there for. Call and ask us, and hopefully we can answer whatever questions that you may have. We're going to talk about the major impacts, the acceptable photo IDs. We're also going to talk about registration and how that changed, and proof of residency. There's been changes also in all of that. Election day voting and the absentee voting. Election day, you're now going to sign, show your proof, but also, you know, something that you've always done was tell them who you are and where you're from. That's always been the law, and now we're having people, well, when do they have to walk into the polling place and tell them, you know, my name and address? Since before 1900, because everybody that's there has a right to know who's voting. So it's recorded in a poll book. Some things that people think have changed really haven't. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to talk about. If you have questions, ask as we go along. And we have a section for impacts on various other groups. We're going to try to talk about the different forms of the photo ID and how it affects people, and then some of the groups that don't need photo ID, or there's special exceptions for these different groups of people because they're not able to get a photo ID, and how that's going to impact them. And then at the end, there's a form for you to fill out. Please do that. It's an evaluation. I'll tell you, if you don't fill it out, I'll fill it out for you, and I really do well when I fill out my own form. So let's talk about the major impacts. It's on page 5. And so what are the changes in the voting process? Well, the first thing is residency. It was 10 days. Now it's 28 days. Well, that's going to make a difference. If you haven't lived there for 28 days and you're a resident of Wisconsin, you'll have to go back to where you came from in order to vote. When it was 10 days, it wasn't as big of an issue. Corroborators. We used to have corroborators. If you walked into a polling place and you had a friend with you, they could corroborate your address because maybe you just moved 10 days ago and you don't have a utility bill and you haven't changed your driver's license. Well, how do you prove that? You had a corroborator. That's been eliminated. So we're going to have to come up with the forms to make sure that you've got this information when you go to register. There are changes in the residency requirement for college students. There's also more information in here that we'll talk about as we go along to talk about registration and talking about student IDs and the difference that makes. Special registration deputies, some of the league members were sworn in as special registration deputies. We used to do that for people to do it statewide. Now you can only be sworn in by your local municipal clerk, and it's only for that municipality. There are 1,851 different municipalities in Wisconsin, so if you want to do it statewide, you only have to see 1,851 different clerks, get sworn in, and by then the 2 years are up and you'll have to start all over. But this is a change, and it's really meant to get people registered, get them into the system. The biggest issue that we have with voter registration is getting people registered. There are approximately 4.5 million people in Wisconsin that could be registered, and there's about 3.5 million that are registered. So there's still 1 million people that we haven't reached. And people can do this in advance, and we're going to talk about voter registration. The big thing to remember is register early. How many people in here are registered? Okay. If you weren't, I would tell you to get registered now. There will be several elections next year. If you register more than 20 days before the election, then you don't have to provide the residency because a clerk is going to mail you a postcard to verify your residence. And that's how the system gets built, and it makes sure that people understand that these are residents. So everything we do is to try to assure people that the system works and that the people registering belong in that district. Now, registration ends either 20 days beforehand. You can register by mail or in person in the clerk's office, or less than 20 days before, up to Friday night at 5 o'clock. It used to be Monday night at 5 o'clock. Now it ends on Friday night at 5 o'clock, and you can register on election day. That did not change. But you used to register on Monday. You can no longer register on Monday. That's the same with absentee voting. You used to be able to vote in the clerk's office up to 5 o'clock the night before the election. That's not true. That ends on Friday night also. At the polling place, we've got changes. You have to present that photo ID, and you have to sign the book. In the past, I don't know if you had any recalls up here this summer. If you didn't, then you haven't been in to sign the book. You need to sign one book, one poll book, and we've printed it so that the poll workers can see the names, and then your name will be printed the other way around, so you'll see it next to the box that you're supposed to sign. So you know that you've signed in the proper vote or the proper name place, and you'll see your number that they've given to you on election day. This way it verifies you are the person and that you know that the right number got assigned. On the ballot itself, there was a change. In partisan elections, you used to be able to fill out the oval or fill in the arrow. Now, for straight party, now you have to go and vote for each individual candidate. There are no longer straight party ballots cast in Wisconsin. You have to mark each candidate individually. And finally, when we talk about absentee voting, in addition to ending at Friday night at 5 o'clock, if you vote in person in the clerk's office, you will have to provide a photo ID. If you register by mail and you're a regular voter, then you'll have to provide it one time to the clerk so that they have a record that you have mailed this in, and that's all you need to do. And there are other special considerations for indefinitely confined and other things that we will talk about because they're exempt from the photo ID. We had a lot of calls when this started from people that said, well, you know, I haven't left the house in 10 years. How am I going to be able to do this? Or I'm in a nursing home. How am I going to get to DMV? And the legislature decided that, well, that makes sense, so that the law was changed, because originally you had to. Now the law has been changed so that those people are considered indefinitely confined or some other considerations, but they don't need to provide the photo ID. But if you're voting at the polling place on election day, you're going to have to provide that photo ID, or you end up voting provisionally. And we'll talk about that also. Now, let's talk about on page 5, or excuse me, on page 9, because we've talked about the photo identification, the registration, the polling places, also the changes in the ballot, and the absentee voting. Now, what are acceptable photo IDs? Well, page 5 or 9 talks about the acceptable photo IDs. And the one thing we want you to remember is there's no such thing as a voter ID. If you go to the Department of Transportation and say, I'd like a free voter ID, they don't know what you're talking about. If you'd like a free photo ID, there's a difference. But there's no such thing as a voter ID. So if you have that driver's license, you've got a form that will allow you to present a photo on election day. It's not a voter ID. There are other forms that you use, but they can be used for the photo ID purposes. Now, the driver's license or the state ID card, the U.S. passport, there's a book and a card, and also U.S. uniform service ID cards can all be used for photo purposes. The difference with this group is they should be unexpired, and if expired, they have 2 years from the most recent general election. So if you voted, if you consider last year the general election, and your driver's license expired in January of this year, you would still be able to go until November of 2012. So there are some exceptions because you need to have it unexpired. And these three, the driver's license, the U.S. passport, and the U.S. uniform service ID cards, could be expired, but they can't be more than 2 years expired. And they have a date on there that says when they expired. So it's important to know because we have more forms. The driver's license or state ID receipt, which is issued now in January when you go in, you may not be getting a driver's license right away. You'll get a receipt and it'll have your photo on it. But it's not a driver's license. It's a receipt, and your driver's license will come in the mail. That's good for 45 days. There's an expiration date on there, and they're only good for 45 days because within those 45 days, you should have gotten your state ID or your driver's license by mail. There's also the certificate of naturalization. That's good for 2 years. You could renew it it would only cost you about $600. So normally people figure within 2 years they've gotten a driver's license or a state ID or some other proof, and so they wouldn't need to use this form. Indian tribal identification cards, what is their date of expiration? It has to be current. And also university student ID cards, and they're good for 2 years from the date that they're issued till they expire. There's going to be some changes with that. There already has been, but there'll be some other changes as we go along. Remember, today is about 2 weeks since we just changed the election law, setting up the August election. That passed the beginning of November. That set the September election that we used to have, the partisan primary, had to have 45 days between that and the November election. So it got moved back to the second Tuesday in August, and that just changed. And when that passed, there were several other changes that have come into play. The printout that you have changed about 2 weeks ago. We're continually updating, making sure that we get the information to you about what you have. If you have questions, we talked about the website. Use our website. Call us. Don't suppose this is the right answer. Give us a call and we'll be glad to walk you through any questions you may have. Because this is a handy document, but you may have some follow-up questions that go with it. On the back side of this, you'll also find some information about what is an acceptable photo ID for voting purposes. Well, it has to include the elector's photograph. It should include the elector's name and a valid expiration date. And that should be on the card. Now, for students, it's a little different. The following, paragraph 2 there, the following photo IDs are not acceptable for voting purposes. Military veteran affairs, it's a current U.S. uniform card, and so it's not veterans. State or federal government IDs, because they don't have all the information on there that's required. Technical colleges, theirs are going to be acceptable along with the universities, or at least that may be the way that it is. The law is going back and forth on that, and so as we get closer to election, you're going to have to check to let people know. If they're in the tech colleges now, they should be getting state IDs of some sort, and they can have both at that point. Out-of-state driver's license or identification cards are not usable at the polling place. Employer IDs are not, because they simply have your picture and your name, but they're missing all the other things that go with it. Membership or organization cards, and finally certificates of citizenship. Its certificate of citizenship is different than the naturalization. The certificate of citizenship isn't usable as a photo ID. And are there types of documents without a photo ID that can be used? And yes, there are. We do have state IDs that are issued that do not have a photo on them, because the persons have a religious conviction of not having their image captured. And they have to fill out a form to that effect that it's a religious reason that they don't do this. So there are several things that can be done. The difference, as you'll note on the slide, is for those that are acceptable, the address is not required, a current address. So if you have a driver's license that you have used, and maybe you've moved and you've registered, and you go to the polling place and you look at it and it doesn't have your current address, it's still an acceptable form of photo ID, because it has your name and your signature, and it has a picture of you. Now, driver's licenses are good for 8 years. Some of us resemble what we looked like 8 years ago. Some of us have changed a little. I'm a little thinner on top and a little heavier on the bottom. So My photo's a little different. But the poll worker's idea is that they have to look at it and say, does this reasonably resemble the voter? And if it does, then they're going to accept it. So that's part of the conditions that come with this. We're training poll workers and clerks and everybody else because this is a big year. Things have changed like they've never changed before. And when we go to the polling places and we do training and we hear, well, that's not the way we've always done it, that's probably true because things are changing. Not difficult changes, but when you change a rule or a law, you have to think, okay, what are the common sense things we need to do? And that's part of what we're trying to get to people about. Get registered in advance. Don't wait for Election Day. In 2004, the city of Milwaukee had 82,000 people register on Election Day. That's more than the entire population of the county, and they all registered on Election Day. They had a few problems. Well, I imagine they did. They have 200 polling locations, 216, I guess. So they have a lot of people working on Election Day. They have a lot of people coming in. If we can get to people and say, get registered now, when you go into the polling place, it's going to make it a lot better. Because of these new requirements, it may slow the process down considerably. And finally, are there electors that are exempt from showing it? Yes, confidential voters don't have to show a photo ID. Confidential voters have already registered with the clerk as a confidential voter. There's a spousal abuse issue or stalking, and they don't want people to know where they live. But they've gone to the clerk and said, I've got this problem. They've got a letter from the judge or the sheriff saying this person should be treated as a confidential voter. And the clerk will issue them a little card that they present on Election Day. And that's all they're going to need because they've already done extra work to get that card. The idea is to prevent that address from being out there and then being visited by people that are stalking them. It's never good. The next page is obtaining a birth certificate. Now, this really isn't something we do or handle in our office, but it's part of the information you're going to need to get other information. And this explains the different ways that you can get a photo ID. You can get it in each county in the Register of Deeds office. You can call Vital Records. You can go to Madison and get it. You can go into the office. You need to know what the requirements are to do that because it changes in a few different places. If you show up, you have to provide identification. If you write a letter, it's one thing. If you fax, it's another issue. So they're all different things that need to be done. My advice, call your local Register of Deeds or call Vital Records and ask before going in to get the process or before just mailing something out. You need to know what the local rules are governing it and how it's going to be affected. Now, if you're in a different state, we had somebody the other day that called and they needed some information from Michigan. Well, there's the equivalent of Vital Records in Michigan. You'll need to talk to them. What do they need? In some cases, they need a state ID, which kind of puts you in a balance because you need the proof of residence to get the state ID, and you need the state ID to get the birth certificate. So it creates some problems. A lot of it can be worked out. You need to talk to the DOT and go to them and talk to them if you have issues. Now the next page actually talks about that. You'll notice there's barrels across the top. I thought those should have been orange barrels, keeping with the highway departments. But each one is significant because in Section 1, do I need a state ID? Well, if you have a driver's license or a state ID or a U.S. passport, or Armed Forces card, or you're part of a federally recognized Indian tribe that has issued you a card, all of those 9 things mean that you don't need anything else. If you don't have that, well then, okay, what qualifies you? Well, you have to be 18. You have to be a resident of Wisconsin. In the case of people that go in and go, well, I'd like one of those free state ID cards. Can you get one? Sure. But you may have to surrender your driver's license to get it. So if you don't want to do that, then you don't go in and get one. But that's part of it, because you can only have one. It looks like a driver's license, but it's a state ID card, and that's all it's for. And you're not going to get one if you have a driver's license. We have people from out of state that say, well, I'm going to get one of those in addition and keep my state out of state driver's license. No. If they go in, they have to surrender their out of state driver's license and get the state ID. So you need to know what it's about before you go there. On the back side of this, we have some additional information that you're going to talk about, and that's part of the other information that we want you to know about in getting the state ID. You'll notice that we have section 3, which is all the information that you're going to need to get a state ID. One from each of those columns. That's how you meet the requirements. And so before you go, don't go to the DMV and say, okay, what do I need? Because you're going to have to go back. So do you have one from each of those? Do you have a birth certificate or a driver's license from another state? Can you provide some of this information to tell them who you are? You just need to have all those necessary documents so that you can get all this stuff done. And then you also want to make sure that you're looking at each one of those forms of identification before you go to section 4, which is completing the application. Because when you go to the application itself, you can get a free ID if that's what you're asking for. How do you do that? Well, this is what the form looks like today. It may be changed. And part of what's on this form is a section down here that talks about getting a free photo ID. And you have to check this box for ID applicants only. I certify that I am a United States citizen, will be at least 18 years of age by the next election, and require a Wisconsin identification card for free in order to vote. You need to ask specifically for it. There's a place on the form. Now they're talking about maybe changing the form and having it a separate form. There should be notices up as you come in to tell you that you can get a free state ID. But you're not going to get a free state ID and a driver's license. You get one or the other. And that becomes important because some people have never driven and they've had this ID, or if they haven't had it, they can get one. But the fact is, it's free, and so, if you ask for it. If you don't ask for a free ID, you can get an ID. It'll just cost you $28. So you need to ask for the free ID. So what are the different types of photo IDs? And that starts on page 15. There's a driver's license and the state-issued ID card. They look similar. The number that's issued is similar. If you look at your driver's license, the first letter is the first letter of your last name. Your birth date's in there, other information's in there about you, and in the last part, after the dash, tells you how many people have this same number. Because it could be other people with your first letter of your last name born on your date. And so there's a lot of information contained in it. And that's why it's a very valuable piece of equipment as you, when you're using it for identification. On the back of page 15 is the information you're going to need to obtain it. Either the driver's license or the state ID. We've tried again to make each one of these single handouts that you can give to people or use to talk to people about what types of information you're going to need. There's this driver's license and state issued receipt. This is the one that you're going to get probably starting in January if they don't have a printer available to print your card. There's also some that are done that are, this is good for 45 days. There's one that's good for 60 if the machine broke. There's other things they can give you. They want to make sure that if you go there and have everything, you're going to walk out with something in your hand. But this will work because it has, again, information and a photo ID. And it just gives you a little bit more ability to work with something, to provide it to the poll workers so that they can see this is who you are and that you've gone through the work of getting this done. That's on page 19. On page 21 is the photo ID without the photo. Again, it's someone who, for religious reasons, does not want their photo taken. That's a possibility. You've got a number there that can be checked. If you're registering on election day and they're going to use this form to prove their residency, that's a different issue. But if the address is correct and they're proving their residency, the poll workers are going to copy down that driver's license number, because that's important. There's a space on the form to show this number. So this is going to be a part of your registration. Then we go to the U.S. passport or card. If you've got questions, I'll answer them as we go along, but I want you to have this information so you can look at it and say, okay, I can refer back to this, and this is something that I can build on. This is something that you're going to get. You can get the original passport. You have to apply for it in person at regional offices. You have to supply the information that's on the back of the page. So these aren't easily obtained. They're not difficult to get, but you have to, again, certify who you are, provide the proof, and it's going to have the information about you that's there. There is a card, and there's also the passport itself. So you may have one or the other. And these are things that we're trying to talk to the poll workers about, because people may have either when they show up on election day to provide for their photo ID, because these are all forms that you can use on election day as acceptable photo IDs. Then we have the uniform service card, which is a little different, but you'll notice that this is a different form. Now, service personnel don't need to register. They're in the military, and so by that fact, they're registered. They do have to apply for an absentee ballot, but they are registered, regardless of whether it's in there or not. However, if they come home, they have to show this when they vote at the polling place. Or if they vote absentee in the clerk's office, they're going to have to show a photo ID. So the one thing I've learned over the last 7 to 8 years working at the Government Accountability Board is for everything that we have that's certain, there's an exception. And that's why, everybody has to be registered except for military, because they're already serving. And so as part of that, we consider them as being registered. There's also the certificate of naturalization that we've talked about. This is what it looks like. Yes?
Back to the military ID. Is
Okay.
there an expiration date or issue date on the military ID?
Well, it's when they're out of the service. It's only good while they're in service. And normally they'll issue them a card when they get out or something like that. So it's only while they're in service. It's a uniform service ID.
So if someone came in to vote and they presented one of these cards, we would assume that it's not expired and valid?
Right. It's their proof in this case because if they've already voted, they're in the system. So now it's just a proof for that.
Is the service, they don't have to like turn in their card or anything?
No, I don't believe they have to. I think they're issued some other information or they're given some other information with it. So it is something you'll have to check on. The clerks usually know if there's changes because in most cases, if they're military and they're away from home, they're mailing out absentee ballots to them. And that part is also changed with absentees for military. Some of the changes are things that the clerks fought for to get, to limit some things or to make it more user-friendly, or in the case of people that register or vote, by having it end on Friday, there's time to get that list into the system and get them into the poll book or the supplemental list so that the people can have them. In some cases, people used to register on Monday. Well, where you have thousands of voters, it's very hard to get that spread out and get it into the system. So this actually made some sense. The voting absentee by Friday also allows people to get those back to the polling place and get them counted, or if they do a central count, then they can handle them in a different way. But it gives the clerk, a little more time just before the election, because if you're going till 5 o'clock on Friday or on Monday night, and you're trying to get all this stuff in, it could be election day before you get all that stuff done. Now they've got the weekend and Monday to get a lot of this work done. Now, the naturalization, again, this has a date on there when it's issued, but you'll notice that it's only good for 2 years. Because at the end of the 2-year process, then it's no longer good, and they've probably gotten some other forms of identification. And finally, the federally recognized Wisconsin Indian tribes, which is on page 29. And you'll notice that there's a list of tribes that are recognized. These are the only tribes in Wisconsin that are federally recognized, and so they could have tribal ID cards. These cards may take longer than a week or 2 weeks to get, depending upon how they're handled by the different tribes. And different tribes handle these cards differently. Yes?
I have one more question about the uniform service ID card.
Okay.
It says on here spouses or dependents of
Right.
service members, so they are all issued ID cards as well?
They're accepted as military, and there's some type of cards that they are issued to prove who they are, especially for those that are stationed in other places or away from home. They, like the military, don't have to register and wouldn't have to provide a photo ID if it were cast other places. But, yeah.
A spouse or a dependent
Yes.
of a serviceman.
Yes, we've had a lot of that lately because we have more service people out, and because of that, we're trying to make sure the clerks know that the spouses or the dependents could do that. And then once we get through the tribes, we have the card that they're going to present, and as I said, sometimes they take a little longer to get. So if people are thinking about this and they're going to use a tribal card, they're going to want to get, again, ahead of time to get all of this information in. Because if you wait till the last minute, you're going to have problems. It's just Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And if you wait till the last minute, there's always something that pops up that you didn't think about. So if you're talking to people that aren't registered, get them registered, get them into the system, have them contact the clerk. Make sure that they know that they can do this, because if they come prepared with the photo ID, but they don't have the residency information that they're going to need, then they can't register to vote on Election Day. And finally, we get to the student ID. And the student ID has some different issues that go with it. They have to be from an accredited Wisconsin university or college there for the student. All 2-year and 4-year university and colleges in the Wisconsin system, accredited private and 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. Tech students, it says, are not acceptable. We're writing, the board has said, yes, we'll accept that. The legislature said we're going to need an administrative rule on that. So we're in the process of writing the administrative rule. Where it goes from there, I don't know. It may or may not be administratively done by the spring elections. Again, for clerks, they're going to need to contact us to let us know. We're saying to tech students, yes, it may qualify, but you may want to look to see that you have other identification to go along with that. The difference is with the university or college ID, it must contain the student's name, the student's signature, the student's photo, the date the card was issued, the date the card expires, and because it can't be expired. If it's expired, it's not going to count. Any student that must also be accommodated, or any ID must be accompanied with a separate document. And that document would be a tuition fee that says, yes, this person is current. Or it could be a university or college issued letter that said, yes, this student is current. They enrolled in the spring or the fall or whenever. And so that's the kind of additional information that they're going to need. Well, what if the student does not comply? Well, your college or ID qualified as an acceptable photo ID. You can use it for the purposes of photo ID for voting purposes, because remember, students, if they're registered, could go in with their driver's license, because you don't need to have your current address on it for photo ID. So they could go in and show their driver's license or their state-issued ID card or even their passport. It may have their home address, but it doesn't matter. The idea of the photo ID is to verify this is the person that they say that it is, not a residency issue. So it's real important that people understand there's a difference. On the back side of page 31, there's a proof of residency for college and university students. There's a difference between photo ID and residency. And this slide, which is updated from the material, says that the tech colleges are in. They are and they aren't. I've learned over the years that sometimes we do the time because the law may change on the way home. We were doing a presentation up north, laid everything out, got in the car, drove home, and as we're listening to public radio, it announced that the law changed while we were training people. It happens, and in our volatile state that we're in now, where people are questioning different things, that's fine. It's just that you need to be aware of it as it goes along. Our board has said tech colleges are in. The legislature wants us, in addition, to write this administrative rule. The proof of enrollment that we talked about is the additional thing that they're going to need with the photo ID. So you know the student is enrolled in the school. Because sometimes you may have a photo ID that's good for 2 years, but they're not a current student. Now, the proof of residency rules that we talked about are on the back here. And they're fairly similar to the normal proof of residency. In some cases, students may have a bank account while they're at college, and that bank statement will have their current mailing address for the university. So that will work as proof of residency. If you go in on election day and you show your bank statement, the poll workers are going to write down, whichever bank it is, the First Bank of Wisconsin, and your account number. We've had people get very upset about that. Well, they brought it in, so there's nothing to be upset about. The reason they write it down is so that if they have to verify, they could call the bank and say, well, I have Mary Jones with account number such and such. Can you verify that she lives at this address? You're providing proof of residency. And that's how you verify proof of residency. The same is true with utility bills. They would write down the name of the company and your customer number. So if they had to, they could call them and verify, yes, this is Mary Jones, she lives at this address. There's a difference in this whole set of items for proof of residency tries to make sure that you're able to certify this is the person that's there. All of this is really being built to provide confidence to voters when they come in that the right people are able to vote. So when you come in and you announce your name and address, that's who you are and that's where you live. And there's proof, you're in the book. When you wait, you have to provide proof of residency so that you can register on election day, and it has to be something that they can go back and check on if they need to. Yes?
Students used to be able to also vote absentee at their primary residence.
Yes.
And they still can do that?
Students are unique in that students can vote either at home or they can vote at the institution they're at, but they can only vote in one. So if they're voting at home, they can't be registered at school. What sometimes happens is people go to school and then somebody comes up and says, well, you better go down and register. Well, they forgot they were registered at home, they go down, they register. When that happens, there's a cancellation sent to the home clerk that says this person is no longer on your voter list, they're now in Green Bay. And so now they're a Green Bay resident. If they want to go home and vote with a new residency, they have to be home 28 days before the election. And then they have to re-register because they registered someplace else and they're no longer on that voter list for their home. And that happens periodically. When it was 10 days, it was a little easier with Christmas breaks. Now it's going to be a little closer because are they home for 10 days or for 28 days? So that's an issue that's going to come up. Students have choices, but everybody has responsibilities, but they'll have to make those choices and be aware that if they register someplace else, that's where they vote. They're going to have to go home and reside there, and then they can re-register. But you can't vote in one or the other. We did have a student a while back that registered before we had voter registration that voted in his hometown and also voted at school. And so they went to see him and they said, well, you can't do that. Well, he said he didn't know you could only vote once. That particular university has upgraded their system a little bit. But it's the kind of thing where we've had that happen, adults, where they own property. Well, I can vote in 2 places. No, you can vote in 1. Everything else is a felony. So it is an issue. It does come up. But with statewide voter registration, when you vote on election day and you're given a number, that night, that number is given off to the county clerk or the clerk, the local municipal clerk, puts it into the system. And it checks with the other 3.5 million registered voters to see if you registered and voted anyplace else in the entire state. And that's how we've caught people where that came in and voted twice that you would have thought would have known that, but they didn't. That happened in Dane County, and the two people that did it were 65 years old. They owned property in two places, so they thought they could vote in two places. I can't imagine why they thought that, but they did, and they got caught because it proved the system worked. When
They've done that all the while?
Who knows? Now that we have voter registration, it doesn't happen because now when you're putting in that second one, these flags go off and say, whoa, this person's already in.
But I mean, if you're 65 and you went and voted twice, you apparently had done it before, you wouldn't just start then, would you?
I don't know. I'm not 65 yet, so I don't know. But there's a possibility. Now, let's talk about registration and proof of residency. What are the changes to registration? Well, part of it is that with registration, if you do it more than 20 days beforehand, you don't need to provide that proof to the clerk. You can do it by mail. If you're a first-time voter, you're going to have to send proof in with it, a photo ID of some sort, because you're getting an application by mail to register to vote. You don't know who it is. So they have to do that if they're a first-time voter. If you're that 65-year-old voter and they move someplace else, they could register by mail and don't need to do that because they're already in the system. We already know who they are, and we're going to cancel them in this other place, and now they're voting in a new place. When you also want to register, you could register with special registration deputies. You can register on election day with a special registration deputy, or one that's been appointed by the clerk to be a special registration deputy within that municipality. And as part of that registration at the polling place, remember you're going to need to bring additional information, not just proof of photo, but you're going to need proof of residency. Because you have to say, this is who I am and this is where I live. So if your driver's license isn't current, it won't work for residency. If it's current, it'll work for proving your residency and it'll work for your photo ID on election day. But in most cases, you want to get people to register early because there's always something that comes up. If you go through page 35, we have a lot of different examples of different types of questions that come up. But remember, the corroborator no longer exists. So if you're expecting to go in, and this happens a lot, especially with younger couples, where the husband lives here and they get married and the wife moves in with him, but she hasn't changed the driver's license, the utility bill isn't in her name, there's no way to prove it. The husband used to be able to act as a corroborator. Now they have to have proof. They'll have to get a utility bill or get their driver's license changed or bring some other proof in so that they can verify who they are. Now, most of the time you can do these kind of things in advance. But the big kick is to get it done more than 20 days beforehand. If I sound a little bit redundant in that, it's because I am, because we get these calls, well, I just went in to register. And then now they tell me I need all this information. Yeah. If you would have done it more than 20 days beforehand, the clerk would have sent you a card to verify your address, and it was all done. But because you waited up until like 2 days or 4 days before the election or on election day, now you have to provide all of this additional information. So get it done early, and it'll make a lot of difference. And finally, well, not finally, but the change of proof of residency, when there's a proof of residency required in the acceptable forms, that actually hasn't changed. That's the way it was since we've had voter registration across the state. It's just that people are now becoming aware of it, or it becomes harder for them to do because they haven't thought about this stuff and they're waiting till the last minute. Remember, we've got over almost 3.5 million people that are already registered. So it's not impossible, but if you wait till the last minute, it becomes a little more difficult. Photo ID versus proof of residency. What's the difference? One says, this is who I am. The other says, this is where I live. And that's the big thing to remember when we're going through all this. With the new law, on Election Day, you need to see a photo ID to verify who you are. If you haven't registered, you have to bring proof of where you live so that you can show people exactly what your current address is. So that's why I talk about the driver's license, if it's current. I haven't moved in 30 years, so my driver's license is current. But if I move tomorrow and I go to use my driver's license for proof of residency, it won't work. I could use it for proof, photo ID proof. That will work. Now, as it says, some documents can be used for both, and a driver's license is a really good example of that because it can be used for both. Election Day. Well, what are we going to do on Election Day? First, you're going to state your name. Great graphics. You're going to state your name. Then you're going to show your acceptable form of ID, your photo ID, and then you're going to sign the poll book. All three things, two of those are new. The first one, announcing your name and address, is the way it's always been. You should, when you walk into a polling place, see a sign that says, please announce your name and address. You were supposed to do that because the two people that are taking the names need to look you up in the book. If you have observers, they're back there, they're entitled to know who's voting. So you're announcing your name and address. And that's probably the hardest thing for voters to do because usually, especially in rural Wisconsin, you walk in and what's the first thing they say? Hi, how are you doing and how are the kids? Now they know who you are. The observers may have no idea who you are. Or the one I really like is the ones that walk into the people taking the names and go, well, hi, you know me. And you're going, no, I don't have the faintest idea who this is. And we have people that will do that. Everybody should announce their name and address. It just makes it simple, especially for the poll workers, because now they can look this up, they've got time, and we run into juniors and seniors and Jim and John and all the other things. And, you know, twins walk in. Well, they're twins for a reason because they may look the same. So it's nice to know which one you're talking to. So that becomes an issue when you're doing this. And it's really your right to tell people, you know, you come in to vote, tell them who you are and where you live. That's part of what goes on. Now, what if you walk in and you don't have an ID on Election Day? Well, if it's a photo ID, it's different than if you don't have a ID. So if you walk in and you don't have a photo ID, you're going to be able to vote provisionally. That's one of the rules to vote provisional. There's 3 rules to voting provisionally. 1, if you registered in advance by mail and you were a first-time voter and didn't provide proof. The clerk has already contacted you and you should have provided proof. Well, you didn't, so on Election Day you have to provide proof of who you are. You didn't have that. The other is somebody that comes in to register on Election Day and doesn't want to give you the driver's license number because they either don't have it with them, or we have one gentleman that doesn't want to tell the state his driver's license number. Think about that, because think who issued his driver's license number to him. He's done this. He's still not registered, unfortunately. And then the third is you come in without that photo ID. You did everything right. You just showed up today and you didn't have your photo ID with you. Now you're going to have to vote provisionally. It's not difficult. They're going to give you a separate ballot. They're going to do a procedure on it. They're going to have you fill out a form. You're going to put it inside an envelope, and then you can come back with the information. We're saying now that you can fax it or email it in, just as long as you've got that proof back to them. So there are different things that can happen, and we don't want people not to be able to vote. Maybe they forgot. You know, the ones I like are the people that come in, well, it's in the car. Okay, well, let's make that next logical leap. Let's go to the car and get it, as opposed to voting provisionally, then coming back. You have until Friday at 4 o'clock to come back. And then they'll count it, maybe at the county canvas. So there's different procedures that are being worked out with this. It used to be done at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, the day following the election. Now it's Friday at 4 o'clock. So all of that's going to be held off. We'll talk about absentee ballots and how that applies in just a minute. Who's exempt? Well, military are exempt. They don't need to provide it. Overseas voters are exempt because they don't need to provide a photo ID. And also the confidential. Remember, those are the ones that go into the clerk's office, fill out the request, and bring the form. They've already done all that work in advance with the clerk. Groups that may substitute documents for their absentee ballots. Now, when we get into absentees, let's just go there. I just have one thing that I want you to know. Be nice to your poll workers on election day. Poll workers had nothing to do with the law. And no matter how much you yell at them, they're not going to change it. So be nice to them on election day. They're there doing a great public service. They're trying to make sure that everybody that wants to vote on election day gets into the system, gets a number, gets a ballot, votes, and leaves. And 99% of those people won't be coming back on election eve to watch out. They believe these people are doing a good job. And so we just want people to be nice to the poll workers, because it is a long day and it is hard work. And you have to work with all of us, which it sometimes can be kind of bad. So let's go to absentee voters, which is on page 41. Who's exempt? Well, the military, as I said. The overseas voters are exempt. Now, overseas voters can only vote for federal offices. These are people that have left the United States, are living in a different country with no plan to return, as opposed to, say, somebody that went to Italy for 6 months. That's different. We had a young lady who was in Rome studying to be a nun, and she was going to be there for 3 or 4 years. She's not an overseas voter because she plans on coming back. She was there to study, so she could vote on a complete ballot. Overseas are people that don't plan on coming back, and they're confidential voters. Now, there's also the ones that are exempt include all of these and voters that substitute information for the photo ID are the indefinitely confined. If a voter is indefinitely confined because of age, illness, infirmity, or disability, they don't need to provide a photo ID. They're already registered. In a lot of cases, they couldn't get out to get a photo ID. But what we've done with those, and also people that are in facilities that are served by special voting deputies, and the voters that are in other care facilities that could have special voting deputies, but the clerk has said no, that they wouldn't be sending them out to them. The people that run the building, run the facility, will authorize someone to represent them saying, yes, this is Mary Lou and I know her. And how they're doing that is on the new form that we have. Voters that must provide photo ID are a little different. Regular voters requesting an absentee ballot have to provide a photo ID. When I request an absentee ballot, the first time, I have to provide a photo ID. And then it's one and done. Because I don't have to any other time, the way the law is as of right now. I only have to provide it that one time. But I do have to provide it. I am registered, but I have to provide a photo ID the first time. Regular absentee voters requesting a ballot by email or fax, same thing. They have to provide it. But when I made the request, if I made it by mail, I probably included my photo ID with it. If you're doing an email or fax, it's pretty hard to include it. So you make the request, you're going to provide it in the ballot, with the ballot when it comes back. And the third one is an in-person voter in the clerk's office. Every time you vote in person in the clerk's office, you have to show your photo ID. So there's a difference. Why? Because you're in person. Now, those additionally, there's the electors who have moved within Wisconsin less than 28 days before the election. They're going to have to provide it going back to their old polling place. And presidential only electors, hospitalized electors, and sequestered jurists. Presidential only are people that have moved here and don't qualify in the other state they came from, not in Wisconsin, but another state that they came from, don't qualify to vote there. They can only vote for presidential. Jurists, on the other hand, or hospitalized electors, are people that right before the election they go into the hospital. Okay, they still have to provide a photo ID when they do that. And also sequestered jurors. They're required to have a photo ID. Because they'll have to pass that through the judge and then they'll go through a whole bunch of steps, but they need to have some type of photo ID. This is the application for a photo ID. And you'll notice that in Part 6 of this application, you can make a request for Election Day. You can make a request for not only that one, but another one. Or, secondly, you can make a request for the balance of the year. So what I do is go in January and make a request for the balance of the year. Because when Election Day comes, I could be in a lot of different places around the state, so I vote absentee. Or third is that indefinitely confined. And if you have someone that's an older voter or has a disability, and my mother's 81 years old, well, in Wisconsin, it snows a lot on almost every election. Hopefully it won't snow in August when we have our one this year, but you need to think about that. It seems like this last year it snowed on all the other ones, so that's part of it. They're indefinitely confined, and how are they going to get there? They couldn't get out to get a license. They couldn't get any type of information. So now they're indefinitely confined, and they can have this mailed to them for as long as they return the ballots. When they don't return the ballot, the clerk is going to send a notice out to them that says, you have 30 days to contact me, otherwise we're going to stop sending you an absentee ballot. And that way, if they're in their home, they can get an absentee ballot. And with absentee ballots, it gets mailed to them, but the return envelope has a stamp on it, so there's no reason that they can't send it back. Because it's already pre-stamped and ready to go back to the clerk's office. So it's one of the things that they've worked out over the years to make sure that the voter gets a chance to vote, and there's nothing that's going to stand in their way in order to get that vote. Now, this is the new form. This has been worked out for some time. When I say sometime, lately, that means about a week and a half, because this is different than it was. And if you look at this form, there is a lot of information that's on the form itself. There's a part up here that applies to the municipal clerks and the poll workers, so they know, yes, this person has provided their photo ID. So when I provide mine once, that's always going to be checked there. So when it comes to the polling place on election day, they'll look at it and say, oh, he's already provided his photo ID, he's okay. This is for the voter. They're certifying that they voted, and they're going to sign it and they're going to date it. Down here's the witness. The witness says, yes, this is the person, I saw them cast their ballot. There's 2 lines there. That's because this is a universal form. This can be used by myself, and I might have my wife sign it, that's fine. But if I was in a nursing home and you sent special voting deputies to the nursing home, there's 2 people that go to the nursing home, and they're to witness this person putting the ballot in the envelope, or assist them if they need help. They're both going to sign. And that's the difference, because that's why you don't need a photo. Somebody's already verifying who you are. You have a or another person witnessing who you are. This has to do with people that are in a nursing home. The voter is not exempt from photo ID requirement. The absentee ballot was faxed or emailed. The photo ID has not been submitted with the application. A copy of the photo ID must be enclosed. So this is a note to the poll workers that says, okay, when you open this up, there better be a photo in there. If there's not, it ends up being rejected. The second one is, voter is a resident in a care facility but is not indefinitely confined. An ID has been provided previously. So somebody that's in a nursing home rehabilitating, doesn't consider themselves indefinitely confined, can vote absentee. But this will be checked by the clerk. It's information that you need. In addition, the Certificate of Care Facility Authorized Representative section of this envelope must be completed. And that's this section over here that's signed by the persons at the nursing home that doesn't have special voting deputies. There's a lot of stuff going on there. The key is, if I vote, I need my signature and a witness. If I'm in a nursing home, I need my signature and 2 witnesses. If I'm in a care facility, I'm going to need to have them fill that out, plus I'm going to have a witness, plus I'm going to sign it. These are the things that have changed. And the poll workers, these are the things that we're going to be educating them on also. Because in order to do this, we've made the accommodation, assuming that the people that are indefinitely confined can't get out and get a photo ID. So this is the answer to verifying this and making this law work. It's a step around the system, but it literally says we can do this and we have a way to handle it. In addition, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'll take whatever questions we've got, but we have different additional groups as we go into impacts on various groups. So let's talk about them real briefly. When we're talking about the groups, we have the elderly, which we've talked about with disabilities, so they can't get in, so they're indefinitely confined. They don't need a photo ID. That's the impact that's going to be on them. Now, these are questions that you may have when you talk to people that say, well, you know, what if I'm in this facility, or what if I have this problem? Do I qualify? The answers are here. You know, if they're in a nursing home, then they could qualify perhaps. If, in my mother's case, she's older, she's in her house, but doesn't think that she's going to get to the polling place on election day because she can't always get around, well, then she's indefinitely confined. She's age, illness, infirmity, or a disability. In her particular case, she has a disability. So it's one of those things that you can look at and talk to people about. Do they have this? Are you 82 and sometimes you just can't get up and get going? Maybe you're indefinitely confined. They have the right to apply. So you need to look at that and be able to answer those kind of questions. On the back of that is what accommodations are available at the polling place. Now, that's a little different. So somebody comes to the polling place and they can't get out of the car to come in. They can't get there because maybe their hip isn't going to allow them to get in, not because it's raining or snowing. There is what we call there is something that we have a curbside voting. So you come to the polling place on election day, you can't go in. Well, they can send 2 people out. You have to send 2 out. They can allow this person to vote. They announce the name when they go out. They have them vote and they come back in. They don't have to sign the book because they're not going to come in and you don't have to take the book out. If you only have 3 people working, you have to stop everybody else from registering and voting. But the person that's curbside could do that. Now, in theory, every polling place is handicapped accessible, so it shouldn't be an issue. But there are people, and we've had them, that wanted to vote. They got them in the car, and they had a hip problem or something else, and they couldn't come in. So they have to let the people inside know so that they can say, we're going to go out, we're going to have Mary Lou vote. Mary votes, comes back, they cast the ballot. So there's accommodations that can be made at the polling place on election day. When we're talking about all of this, we need to talk about the voluntarily and involuntarily committed. Voters that have been adjudicated to vote by court are ineligible to vote. So when you go, and we have people every once in a while that say, well, I don't think my mom should vote because she doesn't know about this or that. My question is, well, are you a judge? Because only a judge can say this person is not eligible to vote. If they made a request, they should be able to vote. If you take them before a judge, there's a competency hearing. And if the judge says, no, this person's adjudicated not to be able to vote, then they can't vote. Some of the other questions that come up is, if you're in a residential care facility visited by special voting deputies, will you be able to vote when the special voting deputy conducted in your location? Special voting deputies are supposed to go there twice, and then you would get it mailed to you if you weren't available. So there are different things that we do for different types of people to try to accommodate them. One of the other issues that comes up is for people who are presumed to be competent. This is in Section 2. Voters that are in nursing home or mental health facilities, people are committed under Chapter 980 for sexually violent offenses, are still eligible to vote, but they can't get out. So they don't need to provide the photo ID because they can't go to get a photo ID. They're still allowed to vote. The same is true with involuntarily committed for people under Chapter 51 or under 971. And we do have some of those across the state that want to vote, but are involuntarily committed. And so we have a way for them to move within the system so that their right to vote is being upheld. And then we get to the homeless voters. Yes?
Backing up to page 48, if a person needs help marking the ballot, is there an age requirement on that?
No. If you go in, the key to getting assistance at the polling place is that the voter has to ask for assistance. Because we do have some husbands and wives, and the husband will go in to help his wife vote. She didn't ask for him to go in. He just thinks he wants to make sure she votes correctly. There's a difference between that and assisting somebody. If you ask for assistance and you come into the polling place and say, I brought somebody in to assist me, or can one of your poll workers, because I have trouble filling in the blanks or the zeros or whatever type of equipment you have, and they need to assist you, then they're going to get a paper ballot and they're going to record that person's name as the assister on the poll book, and they can go help this person vote. But there should only be 2 legs in a polling place on election day, and it should all belong to one person. So you need to think about that, because it isn't something that you can carry on with. So yes, they can get assistance for people that have trouble marking the ballot, or in some cases, if I walk in and I don't have my glasses, I may need to have somebody assist me looking at it. Normally, we have machines that will allow you to get bigger print and do those kind of things. So in most places, well, in every place, there's supposed to be equipment up so people that have a visual impairment or someone that has a hearing impairment can vote on a machine at the polling place. But some people just bring people in to assist them. And so yes, you can get assistance at the polling place on election day. Now, this is for voluntary and voluntarily committed. We try to make sure that they're eligible, that they are a registered voter. Once they've met all of those requirements, they get an absentee ballot, and we make accommodations for them. The homeless voter creates a separate problem, because in the past it was 10 days. Now it's 28 days. And you could have somebody that could go in as someone that would corroborate for them. That's not true anymore. So the homeless voter can get something from a shelter that says, yes, this person is homeless. They have been residing with us for 28 days. There are different ways to get this done. Anytime you're going out and you're working with the homeless, if you would call us, that would be very helpful, because we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to vote, but there are certain things that you have to do. And so with the homeless, we have this whole issue of, how do we do this? Can I register without a document that proves my address? Well, in the third part there, it says, if registering the municipal clerk's office 20 days or more before election, open registration, they wouldn't have to provide proof. It's the people that wait, and then they're going to have to bring some other type of proof to let them know. And then we have finally the ex-felons, people that have served time. They've been convicted of a felony, and they've now served their time, they've done their probation, and they're off paper. Well, they can vote. Their rights are restored to them. We also have people that are in prison but haven't committed a felony. They can vote absentee, because normally the sheriff just doesn't let them out to vote. They're in jail. So we do have people that are in jail but haven't committed a felony, so they're able to do that. And finally, we have the new photo law. When does my name change become effective for voting purposes? For voting purposes, a name change is not effective until you have updated the name with the agency that accepts your acceptable photo ID. So you'll have to make that change and go do those kind of things. And this talks about that because it does come up, you know, people get married, they take different names, or maybe they change their name. Well, it isn't effective until they go through the whole process and get all of that information done. Part of the issues that go along with this is on our last page 57. When we talk about registering it for a confidential, getting the information, if you have questions about registering or there's an issue that's raised, you should call our office or your local municipal clerk or your county clerk. All of those will be helpful because everybody understands voting and the rights that everyone has. So if you have questions, as I've said before, don't let it bother you. Give us a call. Let us know what your questions are, and we'll try to answer them. We've got some questions that I've had that have called the office. If we can't tell you right now, we'll find out and talk with the people that we need to talk to. It's good, because I'm worried when there's no questions.
If there's a question about the interpretation of the validity of an ID, does that go into a provisional ballot then, and you come back and recheck it?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. When you say the validity of an ID.
Let's see what page it was here.
I mean, there's certain things that qualify and certain things that don't. And I guess that's one of those issues that comes up. What you can do, if you go to an election day and you have a question that you don't think this person looks like the photo ID, or there's a question of other questions you may be able to challenge. But someplace you have to walk through the voter being able to do it. If they've provided all the information and you question it, then you may want to challenge it. And there's a whole challenge procedure that poll workers can do, but normally we say, you know, make sure that you have proof of what you're talking about. We had one lady that was questioning people because they didn't have American-sounding names. I'm not sure what that is, because I grew up with, you know, Swedish and Norwegian and Irish and everything else. They all sounded American to me. And so that was her question of, well, what is an American-sounding name? It has to be a challenge that you have some validity. You don't think this person, or you think this person may be a felon, they're not 18, you know, they haven't resided here for 28 days. Those are issues that would come up. If you think that the proof that they're providing isn't valid, then I suspect you can challenge for that. But there's a whole challenge procedure, and you get sworn in because you have to say, I don't believe this person is qualified because of this issue. And I have proof of this. And then you're going to get sworn in. They're going to get sworn in because you're going to ask them, okay, this gentleman thinks that you're a felon. No, I've had my rights restored. Great. You know, there's a whole challenge procedure that goes with it. So there are ways, if you think somebody shouldn't be voting, that you can challenge the voter. But in most cases, you know, we've got this list, and we're going to have it to the poll workers. We've got a brand new Election Day manual that's completed now, so that'll be able to be downloaded. We're hoping to get at least one copy of that to every municipal clerk in the state. So we're working on getting all this done before the spring primary, if we have one. And we want people to say, okay, these are the forms that are acceptable. So if it's not on that list, then maybe it's not acceptable. That's the only way I can answer that question. If it's not on the list that we provide, then it's probably not an acceptable form.
I guess when I was looking at this, the photo ID, where it says the photograph must reasonably resemble the elector and the elector's name must conform to the name on the voter registration. which means it doesn't have to be exact or identical to the name.
Because sometimes you'll have a Bob rather than a Robert, and some people have that on their driver's license, but they registered as Robert or vice versa. And those are things that come up. It's up to the poll worker to make that decision. And it's the key word there is reasonable, like reasonably resemble. Like I said, I'm a little thinner on top and a little heavier on the bottom. I still kind of look the same. My picture's only 8 years old, so if I shave my mustache, nobody will probably know who I am. But that's, it's, do they reasonably resemble who the person is? And does this conform to the proof that they're giving to you? Other questions? It's an awful quiet group. None from the clerks either, so we can't get any more information? Well, you'll probably have questions on the way home, because usually I have my best questions after everything's done. And I get home or I get in the car and think, gee, I wish I would have asked that. You've got our direct number. My phone number is 266-3061. And, I'll be out tomorrow, but I'll be in after that. Let us know, because we can provide you with the information or a place to look. And the law is changing. So sometimes the things that were one way aren't the same today. So let us know and we'll try to walk you through any questions you may have. Otherwise, thank you to the League for putting this on, and thank you all for coming. Please fill out the evaluation and drive safe.